Hello everyone, welcome to Sinister Prime. Since many of you listen to these stories to relax and drift off into dreams, I thought it would be wonderful to hear where you're tuning in from around the world. Let's begin the story. It was the dead of winter, and I had just started a new job as a night security guard at an abandoned psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of town. The hospital had been shut down in the 1970s, but it had recently been purchased by a developer who planned to turn it into luxury apartments. My job was to keep an eye on the place until the renovations began. The building was a sprawling maze of dark corridors and empty rooms, with a chilling history of patients who had lived and died there under grim conditions. On my first night, the air was thick with an eerie stillness, and every creak and groan of the old structure seemed to whisper secrets from its haunted past. My shift started at midnight. Armed with a flashlight and a walkie-talkie, I began my rounds. The developer had installed a few security cameras, but many areas of the building remained unmonitored due to its sheer size. As I walked through the dimly lit hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Around 2 a.m., I entered the old patient wing. The rooms were empty, save for rusted bed frames and peeling wallpaper. I shone my flashlight into each room, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that the shadows were moving just out of sight. As I approached the end of the hall, I heard a faint noise behind me, a soft, almost imperceptible scraping sound. I turned quickly, but the hallway was empty. My heart pounded as I convinced myself it was just the building settling. I continued my patrol, but the sound stayed with me, echoing in my mind. I decided to check the security monitors in the control room to calm my nerves. The control room was a small, windowless space, filled with screens showing grainy footage of various parts of the building. As I scanned the monitors, something caught my eye. In one of the hallways, near the old operating theater, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was too dark to make out any details, but the silhouette was unmistakably human. I grabbed my flashlight and headed towards the operating theater, my hands trembling. The hallways seemed to stretch on forever, each step echoing off the walls. When I reached the spot where I had seen the figure, there was no one there. I shone my flashlight around, illuminating empty gurneys and dusty surgical tools, but found nothing. Just as I was about to leave, I heard the scraping sound again, louder this time. It was coming from the morgue. My breath caught in my throat. The rational part of my mind screamed to leave, to call the police, but some twisted curiosity pushed me forward. The morgue was in the basement, accessible only by a narrow staircase. As I descended, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with the smell of decay. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The room was filled with old, rusted body drawers and empty autopsy tables. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, but I saw nothing. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. I pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. My walkie-talkie crackled to life, and a distorted voice filled the room. "You shouldn't be here." My blood ran cold. "Who is this? What do you want?" I shouted into the device. The voice laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I'm always here. I've always been here." The lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. My flashlight sputtered and died. In the pitch black, I could hear the scraping sound again, closer now, as if something was dragging itself across the floor. Desperation took over, and I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight. The dim light illuminated the room just enough for me to see that one of the body drawers was slightly open. A pair of eyes stared out at me from the darkness, wide and unblinking. I stumbled back, tripping over an autopsy table and falling to the floor. The drawer creaked open further and a figure emerged. It was a woman. Her skin pale and translucent, her eyes hollow and devoid of life. She moved with a jerky, unnatural motion, her limbs twisting and contorting as she crawled towards me. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the door, pounding on it with all my strength. "Help! Somebody help me!" The woman's rasping breath grew louder as she drew closer. I could feel her icy fingers brushing against my ankle. Just when I thought it was over, the door burst open, and I fell into the hallway. 2 police officers stood there, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, helping me to my feet. "There's someone in there," I gasped, pointing towards the morgue. They drew their weapons and entered the room, but when they turned on the lights, it was empty. The drawers were all closed, the room as still and silent as it had been before. I tried to explain what had happened, but my words sounded insane even to me. The officers escorted me out of the building, and I spent the rest of the night at the police station, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The next day, I quit my job. I couldn't go back to that place, not after what I had experienced. I later learned that the hospital had a history of patient abuse and that many had died under mysterious circumstances. Some said their spirits still haunted the building, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to enter. A few weeks later, I received a call from my former boss. He sounded desperate, his voice trembling with fear. "We need you to come back, just for one night. The new guard quit, and we can't find anyone else on such short notice." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, but I reluctantly agreed. The money was good, and I needed the job. I arrived at the hospital just before midnight, the memories of that horrifying night fresh in my mind. This time, I came prepared. I brought a stronger flashlight, extra batteries, and even a can of pepper spray, though I doubted it would do much against a ghost. The new security measures included more cameras, covering areas that had been previously unmonitored. I started my rounds, my nerves on edge. The hallways seemed darker and more sinister than before, each shadow hiding potential terror. Around 1 a.m., I reached the control room and checked the monitors. Everything appeared normal until I noticed movement in one of the old therapy rooms. A figure was sitting in a chair, facing away from the camera. It was the same room where controversial shock therapies had been performed decades ago. My heart raced as I headed towards the therapy room. The air grew colder, each step echoing ominously. When I reached the room, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and shone my flashlight inside. The chair was empty, but the room was freezing, my breath visible in the beam of light. As I turned to leave, I heard the familiar scraping sound, louder and more menacing than before. It was coming from the hallway. I stepped out and saw the figure again, this time at the end of the corridor, its back to me. It was a tall, gaunt man wearing an old-fashioned hospital gown, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty halls. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, and it slowly turned its head towards me. The face was a mask of horror, eyes sunken and lifeless, mouth twisted in a silent scream. My blood turned to ice as it raised a skeletal hand and pointed directly at me. I turned and ran, the sound of dragging footsteps following me. I didn't stop until I reached the control room, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands shook as I grabbed the walkie-talkie. "Hello? Is anyone there? I need help," I shouted, my voice breaking. Static filled the room, followed by a faint whisper. "You can't escape." The lights flickered and I could feel a presence in the room with me. The temperature dropped, and my breath came out in ragged gasps. The monitors flickered, showing distorted images of the hospital's dark past. Patients strapped to beds screaming silently, doctors performing cruel experiments, and shadows lurking in every corner. Suddenly, the screen went black, and a single word appeared. "Leave." I didn't need any more encouragement. I grabbed my things and bolted from the control room. As I ran through the hallways, I could hear voices whispering, crying, and screaming, filling the air with their torment. The walls seemed to close in on me, the darkness pressing down like a suffocating blanket. I burst out of the front door and into the cold night air, not stopping until I reached my car. I sped away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, the hospital a distant, haunted memory. I never went back to that place. The developer eventually gave up on the project, and the hospital remains abandoned to this day, a crumbling monument to its dark history. I often wonder if anyone else has encountered the spirits that haunt its halls, or if they remain trapped there, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to wander into their domain. One thing is certain, something malevolent lurks in that old hospital, and it's always watching, waiting for its next victim. And sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, reaching out from the darkness to claim those who dare to disturb it.